Some time ago, I made a video response to TektonTV's video about how the Bible recommends people treat women. It will be easier to understand this video if you watch that video first. The link is in the description.
Okay, so apparently this loser has decided to horn his uneducated nose into my business.
I responded to something you put on the internet. Saying I stuck my uneducated nose in your business makes it sound like I criticized your private life.
All we have amounts to these objections. 1. Whining like a scalded puppy about it not being ever right to execute someone for not being a virgin.
Well, why would stoning a woman for not being a virgin ever be justified?
2. Making idiotic remarks denying that ancient law codes were didactic.
Perhaps they are didactic, by which he means that they are not to be taken as mandatory instructions, but they don't look that way from the examples TektonTV gives. The Bible says that women who are found to not be virgins on their wedding night should be stoned to death. This instruction is followed by the words, "You must purge the evil from among you." If this isn't meant to convey that the punishment is mandatory, then this is yet another example of apologists effectively claiming that the Bible was written by someone with the communication skills of a Sasquatch with a speech impediment. And even if it is an optional punishment, how could that option possibly be justified?
Let's take the second one first, since it's nothing but typical fundy atheist hogwash. Newsflash, messianic moron. Your momentary sense impression as a YouTube loudmouth of what something sounds like is not a rebuttal to the work of numerous scholars of the ancient Near East who say that ancient law codes were didactic.
I never argued that it is. I am simply explaining why I am not convinced.
No, the bit about purging evil is not a mandatory minimum.
Then why is it written in a way that makes it sound like one?
That's a thoroughly modern penal notion which you are idiotically importing into the text.
It's a modern penal notion that the text's instructions strongly resembles.
Language like that was exhortational. It was meant to emphasize the seriousness of the offense.
How can you tell? How do you tell the difference between an instruction meant to be taken literally and one that is merely exhortational?
Not impose a mandatory minimum. That's the same reason why a lack of blood on those sheets wasn't cause to dial 911 and have a hissy fit. The fact that some virgins might not bleed after their first sexual encounter was something that would be pled before the judicial bodies of the day.
Now you're changing the subject. I'm talking about the prescribed punishments for convicts, and you are talking about the jurisprudence by which they are convicted. Even if the woman is fairly demonstrated to not have been a virgin on her wedding night, my point is that the prescribed punishment is written in a way that looks like execution is mandatory, and that even if it isn't, the fact that it is even an option is indefensible.
Because law codes were only didactic. That's what scholars of law codes like Hillers and Wells say.
Again, if that's true, it's a very sloppy way of writing the law. The very fact that Hillers had to make an argument for this, rather than it being obvious to everyone, shows that the text does not live up to the level of clarity I think any reasonable person would expect from a perfect, omniscient, all-loving God. I think it is entirely reasonable to expect an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving God to write a text that is perfectly clear to everyone and which required absolutely no hermeneutical or exegetical effort at all.
It's only amateur YouTube loudmouths like the messianic moron with no relevant or worthwhile academic qualifications who say otherwise.
I've lost count of how many times he's made this fallacious appeal to authority.
Now with that, how about all those repeated whines about executing virgins?
I never said a thing about executing virgins. My complaint is that the Bible prescribes executing non-virgins.
Well, some of it, the messianic moron and his drones are just too sex-crazed to get past the idea that someone is being punished for what they see as the non-offense of failing to keep it in their pants.
Yes, the fact that someone doesn't think you should ever execute a person for not being a virgin is clear evidence that they are sex-crazed.
And that's mainly because what we have here are a bunch of babies who have lived their whole lives in air-conditioned comfort, free of any need to struggle to survive.
Listen, you snowflakes, if you want to survive in the harsh wilderness of ancient Judea, sometimes it is appropriate to murder people for not being virgins on their wedding night.
There's a clue that maybe they aren't old enough to know about yet, but I'll illustrate it with an analogy from this, which is one of my favorite sci-fi novels. The beginning of the story features aliens on a generational spaceship traveling between the stars. The race driving this ship is peaceful and friendly, but there's a certain act that gets the death penalty immediately in the form of getting thrown out of an airlock. Namely, having sex without using birth control. Why? Well, think about it. Generational ship, limited resources. If you make it so you can reproduce wantonly, that's the same as giving a middle finger to everyone else on the ship and saying, I don't care if I put a strain on the limited resources available on this ship and risking everyone else's life and health, so screw you.
The problem in that example is overpopulation. That's not a problem that people of ancient Judea had. Also, even if it was, abortion would make far more moral sense than killing a parent who reproduced wantonly, especially if you believe that aborted fetuses go straight to heaven.
Well, that's the same thing anyone in the social world of the Old Testament was doing anytime they had sex outside controlled social circumstances.
If ancient Judea were analogous to a generational ship with limited resources, why would the Bible say, "Be fruitful and multiply"? Preventing fruitful multiplication was obviously not the reason why women were punished for extramarital sex.
So no, messianic moron, it's not about someone having hang-ups about being married to a non-virgin.
Then why does it look that way?
It's about someone by way of their wanton behavior telling their family and neighbors, I don't care if I act irresponsibly in the process, and I don't care if my selfishness puts a strain on limited resources and puts others at risk of starvation. All I care about is what's in my pants.
Let's say that this is true. My question remains unanswered. How the fuck does that ever justify execution, especially when abortion is an option?
And yeah, there were other factors in that as well, such as the potential for the spread of disease and the destruction of family units.
How would it destroy family units?
Real penny-ante stuff, right? Now, from this point, we can expect the usual funny atheist whines asking things like why God didn't magically plop a Safeway supermarket down in the desert, or get them some free birth control so that they didn't have to worry about starving and could take it out of their pants all they wanted. That's about all we'd expect from a crowd devoted to relieving themselves of personal responsibility.
Saying you just don't want to take personal responsibility is not an answer to the question of why we should have to execute people for having extramarital sex when there is supposedly an all-powerful, all-loving God that could prevent any deleterious pregnancy.
I'll close for a hint to the messianic moron. Keep your nose out of historical and exegetical issues like this one, because you're downright incompetent at it.
Let's say that's true. What would you consider to be a more effective means of overcoming this incompetence? Uncritically adopting the hermeneutics of the scholars you cite, or critically engaging with them in the way I'm critically engaging with you? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.